I woke up with a start. I looked around and saw that nothing was wrong. I was still in my bedroom, and everything was dark. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but before I could lie back down, there was a crash, and then I heard glass breaking. I sat up. Suddenly, my breathing began to become ragged. My heart pounded against my chest. A burglar! There's a burglar in the house! Suddenly, I was regretting not buying into that security system that Fred tried to sell me last month. I tried to call the cops, but saw that my battery was dead. So, I had no choice. I picked up my baseball bat and slowly made my way down the stairs. I could see light coming from the kitchen. I realized that whoever it was had opened my fridge. I heard chomping and chewing. And suddenly, my heart stopped. A wolf! A wolf has broken into my house and is now eating my leftover meatloaf! And then, I realized I was living in a suburb next to the city, and the nearest forest was 100 miles away. Wolves don't break into houses, and they don't have any opposable thumbs to open fridge doors. Duh. I tried not to make a sound when I rounded the corner towards the kitchen where the sounds were coming from. When I saw what awaited me, I couldn't help but gasp. Hey there, I'm River. I ended up saving the royal family and the Prime Minister. This is how it happened. Think you have a unique title for a story? Comment it down below and like the ones you think are interesting. You never know, your story may be the next one we post. Alright, now, back to the story. The girl stared back at me in shock. Her eyes grew wide with fear and she dropped the plate she was eating out of. It shattered next to the remains of the vase that she must have broken when she stumbled through the darkness. My first thought was that I badly wanted to have that meatloaf in the morning. My second thought was, who are you? And what are you doing in my house? I leveled the baseball bat at her as a warning, but the initial shock had already left the girl's face. Instead of fear or guilt, she seemed somehow annoyed? I'm eating your food. Are you blind? Seriously, a baseball bat? You're gonna threaten a 5'4" petite girl with a baseball bat? I dropped the bat without knowing why, but somehow something told me she was not dangerous. I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. I can't! Can't you see? I just escaped. They're gonna come looking for me. She held up her arms, and sure enough, there were a pair of broken handcuffs on them. She really escaped from somewhere, that's for sure. Whether it was from prison or an asylum, it was hard to tell. I was about to ask her that when someone began pounding on my front door. Who would be knocking on people's doors in the middle of the night? I remember thinking. Don't get that! Please, don't get that! Suddenly, the fearless girl turned into a slinking puppy. Her eyes begged me not to open the door. I'm still gonna have to call the cops! The girl threw herself at my feet and hugged my legs so I couldn't move. No! Please, I'm begging you! Don't call the cops! Don't! The cops work for them! If you open that door, they're gonna take me away! But the knocking continued, and it was getting louder and louder. Somehow I managed to wriggle away from her. I opened the door and saw two towering men who looked... well, I can't describe it a different way. They looked evil. When I looked behind me, the girl was already gone. So sorry to bother you this late in the night, sir, but we're part of your neighborhood patrol. There have been reports of a strange girl breaking into people's houses. We received a tip that she went in this direction. Have you noticed anything strange tonight? Perhaps seen a girl who looks like this? One of the men showed me a photo, and it was definitely the girl who was chowing down on my food. I pretended as if I'd just gotten up. I yawned and rubbed my eyes. Oh, you just woke me up in the middle of the night. So far, that's the strangest thing I've seen tonight. So sorry about that. Apologies for disturbing you, sir. We'll get going now. I shut the door, but my heart was pounding. I was so sure they were going to barge into my house. The thing was, I knew our neighborhood patrol. I knew them because they were my gardener's sons. And those two were definitely not Pablo and Hector. I watched them drive away through my window, and when I jumped around, the girl was there again. It made me jump. Sheesh! Can you not sneak around like that? The girl hugged me tight. What are you doing? Thank you. I told you they'd come looking for me. Those were my kidnappers. I'm Lila, by the way. Lila told me everything. She explained that she was the Prime Minister's daughter. That explained why I felt like she looked familiar. I'd actually seen her before in one of those charity dinners that my parents always invited me to. So when I learned that, I got kinda nervous. Having the Queen's cousin in my house in the middle of the night? That was kinda insane. She told me that the Queen and her husband have been dealing with troublesome noble families for a while. They discovered that many of the aristocratic families were corrupt, and they've been trying to slowly and silently take power away from these families. The Queen has been using her power and connections to take away important titles and roles from them to curtail those families' power and influence. Of course, those families did not like it at all. And when they threatened to rebel against the royal family, the Queen retaliated by threatening to expose those families and the evil deeds they were doing. That would bring ruin and scandal to them, and they would never survive it. So, to make sure that didn't happen, the aristocrats had Lila kidnapped. They were gonna use me as collateral, as leverage. Luckily, the people who were watching me fell asleep, and I escaped. And now I'm here. Well, I'm sorry. I broke your face. And the plate. And that I was inhaling your food earlier. It's just that I haven't had anything to eat for days. I forgave her for that, of course. I even took pity on her. I can only imagine how traumatizing it would be to go through all that. So I let her stay the night. I stayed up and took watch. I was still scared these two strange guys who would break into my house. The next morning, I called my dad. He was high up in society, so he must know the Prime Minister, or someone who works in his office. So I told him to pass a message for me. That evening, Mom and Dad came to visit me, looking worried. What have you gotten yourself into? I had no choice. I had to help her. We know, son, and we're glad you did the right thing, but these people are dangerous. We just don't want anything to happen to you. I know, Mom, but I'll be okay. I promise. Is she here? Is the Queen's cousin staying at your house? Yeah, but obviously no one else is supposed to know, so I'd appreciate it if you tell no one else. Of course. You will call me if anything happens, yes? I will, Dad. Alright. The Prime Minister sends you his thanks. And he told me he's begging you to let his daughter stay here. He can't have her extracted now. He says here is safer because nobody would suspect she's staying here. If they could kidnap her from her own room, they could do it again. Here? With me? He's doing this for your safety too. If they somehow found out that she's free and that she stayed here, they could come after you. Or our family. So, of course, I agreed. The trouble was, Lila was beautiful and charming, and she made me laugh. Spending all that time together made me fall for her, and she fell in love with me. That love bore us twins. It was a year later, just after the birth of my two boys, that things really went bad. The Queen was still cracking down on the corrupt aristocrats, and feeling cornered, they struck back. They used their power to spark a rebellion, and people began to riot. The aristocrats stormed the palace. But when they got there, the only people left in the palace were the ones painted on a canvas. It was thanks to my dad playing spy for the Prime Minister that we were able to know the aristocrats' plans. My dad used his influence, and with my mom's family connections, we were able to smuggle the entire royal family, the Prime Minister and his wife, and some of the people who work for their families out of the country. They dressed up as tourists. The day before the riots, they joined the mass of tourists that were leaving after visiting the palace. My brother was in that group, and he led the royal family and their entourage to a train station where a train was waiting for them. By the time the aristocrats stormed the palace, the royal family were already safe in a neighboring country. As for the Prime Minister and his wife, Mom led them to my house. That was when they met their new grandsons for the first time. We worked tirelessly in secret. We gathered support. We rallied all the people who were still loyal to the crown. and with the help of Dad's network in the business world, sanctions were put on the rebellious families. Their assets were frozen, and within a few months, the rebellion was squashed. The Queen and her entire family were again free to come home. On the 5th anniversary of the royal family's return, the country held a celebration, and at the center of that celebration was a wedding. Mine and Lila's. We waited 5 years so our sons could be our ring bearers. The whole country watched and celebrated with us. The Queen was there with her family too. And as a wedding gift, the royal family gave me a knighthood and an estate so large, I could fit 40 football fields. Everyone stared at me, as if I was the only one in the world who could solve all their problems. I personally didn't see what the matter was. She was just a helpless, homeless lady. The least they could all do was give her a little bit of sympathy. But I heard the moans and groans of all the customers, and my manager was standing over my shoulder whispering in my ear with threats. "If you don't get rid of that smelly hobo, I'm docking your pay this week." "But, sir, she just wants to use the ladies' room. The poor woman looks like she's been through enough." "Can't you see? The customers don't like her here. And who pays your salary?" You? My manager slapped me over the head. "The customers, you idiot! Now get over there and tell her she can't use the toilet and that she needs to leave, or I swear you won't see your paycheck this month." I thought it was unfair. I thought it was unfair that my boss was forcing me to do something I wasn't comfortable doing while holding my salary hostage. And it was unfair that those people who had the privilege to afford a $10 cup of coffee couldn't tolerate the sight of a suffering woman for even a couple of minutes. They weren't even trying to hide how disgusted they were with her. They covered their noses and shooed her away when she got close to their table. Some even hid their wallets and phones, as if she was gonna steal it from them. That really bothered me. So I took a muffin from the display, the jacket I came to work with, and made a steaming cup of hot chocolate to give to her. But my manager grabbed my arm, causing the drink to spill all over me. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare give her anything from my store, Andy!" "Just take it out of my pay. You love doing that anyway." So, to the horror of my manager and all those snobby folks who went to that cafe, I gave the woman my jacket and a muffin. "This way, ma'am. You can sit in this table. And you're welcome to our facilities." It was as if they saw someone commit the biggest atrocity there was. I simply hugged a homeless woman. By their reaction, it was as if I'd thrown a puppy in a tank full of sharks. My manager lost it. He dragged me by my collar and he did the same to the lady. He pushed and dragged us out of the cafe as he shouted for us to get out. "You're stinking up the whole place! And you're fired!" My name's Andy. I lost my job when I helped out a homeless woman. And this is the story of how I bankrupted the guy who fired me. Think you have a unique title for a story? Comment it down below and like the ones you think are interesting. You never know, your story may be the next one we post. Alright, now back to the story. I had to help her, even though doing it lost me my job. Still, I made sure she didn't wander off without having at least a hot meal. I took her to a diner, ordered her a huge meal and something else for her to take with her. She asked if I could drop her off at the park she slept at. Instead, I called one of my friends who volunteered at the shelter and got her a bed there. Before leaving her at the shelter, I gave her all the money I had. All $52 of it. And then I hugged her goodbye. I may not have much to give, but at least I had a roof over my head. And I wanted to make sure she would be able to get off the streets. I made sure my friend helped her out and introduced her to people who could give her a job. And then, I went on with my life. Never would have I guessed in all my life that small act of kindness would come back my way years later. I was still waiting tables at that point. Yeah, I know. But breaking into the theater scene is pretty hard, especially if you're a nobody with no connections, and you don't have the money or the right family name to get you by. So, anyway, I was waiting tables when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I knew that was you. I blinked twice in confusion. I'm sorry, ma'am. Do we know each other? I was pretty sure I'd never met someone like her. She was beautiful, almost like a model, and she had lavish jewelry on her. If I'd met anyone that rich, I'm pretty sure I'd remember. But the lady just laughed. Ma'am, do I look that old? Just call me Irene. It's me. Don't you remember? You helped me all those years ago. Irene? Irene? Oh my gosh! As in, yeah, I was homeless when we met. And because of you, my life changed. I'm so glad we're seeing each other again. I've been looking for you for a year. Looking for me? Why? Well, I wanted to thank you, silly. I've been asking around for you, but even your friend at the shelter doesn't know where you live anymore. Oh, yeah. Well, I moved. Couldn't afford the rent there anymore. Well, then come live in mine. That's a very generous offer, but I don't think I can pose like that. Nonsense! If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have gotten off the streets. Ever since you helped me, everything in my life turned out for the better. I've gotten so lucky, and I owe that to you. This whole time I've thought about you. I promised myself I would pay you back for everything you did. And if you won't accept living for free at my house, then pay me rent. At the very least, you'll be living in a luxurious place. She wouldn't take no for an answer, and my manager was getting annoyed that I was neglecting my other tables. So I just said yes so she would stop begging. The next morning, Irene sent a limo to my house. I thought it was an empty offer, but it turned out she was determined to get me to move into her house. A truck came by filled with a bunch of men, and they didn't even ask me if I wanted to move my stuff. They just started boxing up my belongings and loading them into the truck. In less than an hour, I was standing at the door to my new home. And it was massive. Like the kind of houses you only see in magazines. Made sense, because Irene looked like the kind of woman you only see in magazines as well. She really did come far from where we last met. Apparently, thanks to the job she got, she learned a lot about the tech industry. And one day, she decided she'd try and become a programmer herself. And after a couple years, she became good enough to make her own apps. She built her own startup from her small apartment, and then the unthinkable happened. She was contacted by some huge company, and they decided to buy her piece of tech for $10 billion. I was very happy for her when she told me her story, especially since I know where she was before. Now I can do whatever I want, and what I want is to thank the man who rescued me. I didn't do much. You did enough. You're gonna have to stop thanking me at some point. Honestly, you said you'd charge me rent, but you never take my money. And every time you give it back to me, there's always more in my bank account. If you really want to pay rent, have dinner with me. It was awkward at first, but everything after that dinner was, as they say, history. Irene and I fell in love, and we got married. She even funded the musical I was writing, and now it's on Broadway. I never dreamed I would ever be able to work at Broadway, much less become the writer and producer of a hit show. It was after a party celebrating my show's win at the Tonys that we happened to drive past the street where Irene and I first met. We grew quiet. It was kind of strange being back there. But then something caught my eye. The cafe. It was still there. Now, I'm not the kind to hold a grudge, but I really hated working there. And because the owner and manager of that place fired me, I went through a lot of hardships and even lost my chance to pitch my musical to a producer because I couldn't afford the bus. Seemed such a long time ago. When I saw that store, I felt a burning rage inside me. The very next week, I bought the plot of land next to it. I built the nicest, fanciest cafe and poured a lot of money into marketing it. I even asked my celebrity friends to frequent it. In no time at all, the cafe where I used to work at tanked. All their customers came to my cafe instead. I even poached all their employees and offered them twice their salary. And since my old manager could never compete with what we offered, and most days their cafe was empty, they closed down. I watched him close the doors and lock them for the last time, and I couldn't help myself. I just had to let him know. I wanted him to know it was me. So I took Irene and we caught up with him just before he could drive away. "Hey, boss! Remember me?" "I don't know you. Please go away. I'm not in the mood to talk to random people." "Ha! I can imagine. Must be tough going bankrupt, huh? You can thank me for that. I actually own the new cafe next to yours. Remember when you fired me for helping a homeless woman? Well, I guess karma goes around, eh? 'Cause now I get to buy your cafe for cheap. Maybe I'll put a McDonald's in there. Oh, and that homeless woman? This is her now." My old manager's face was priceless. He could hardly believe his past would haunt him like that. The poor guy actually came to my cafe weeks later begging for a job. And you know me. I like keeping people out. Unfortunately for him, I only deserve those who deserve it.